Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University. Welcome to our second video in our sixth week of class in the graduate course entitled Principles of Interface Design. In this session, let's take a look at designing ActivInspire flipcharts for use on the Promethean board. In our first video for week 6, we looked at designing an audio podcast. In this second video, let's focus again on ActivInspire flipcharts, and let's look at both mechanics of them, and also let's take a look at design issues as we create these flipcharts for use on the Promethean board. And our application this week, you'll have a choice of either creating an audio podcast or designing a flipchart. What we know as the Promethean board of today was originally developed in 1996 and was known as the Active Board Interactive Whiteboard. It was a metal board controlled by a magnetic pen. The nice thing about this board is that as opposed to the Smart Company creating the Smart Board, which was made primarily for business use, a Promethean board was created specifically for educational use. Now, some folks may be familiar with it and use it in their schools, and you may not, depending on what technology your schools employ. But if you're unfamiliar with it or not as familiar, as opposed to PowerPoint that uses a slideshow as the metaphor to create the presentation, the Promethean board and the active software that runs it uses the metaphor of a flip chart, or the old-fashioned type of large tablet that a teacher would write somewhat on that tablet, would flip the page, and then also write some information live. So that's the metaphor for use of the Promethean software. Over the years, since its inception, the Promethean software has changed quite a bit. Originally, there was Active Primary for younger children and Active Studio for older students, for high school students. Now the two have been merged, and it's called ActivInspire. And the nice thing is that educators can download a personal edition free of charge. You can practice, you can prepare your lessons, you can do most of the things that you could do on the board, with just a few exceptions. And those exceptions are some things that you probably wouldn't be apt to use anyway, unless you were like on your own computer, unless you were at the board live working with students. For example, things like drawing shapes and doing shape recognition, doing handwriting recognition so you can write something and convert it over to typed text immediately. Well, if you're on a PC environment, you're just going to type it in. So realize that there are some things that are not modeled in there. I mean, I should say they're there, but they're just not turned on for the personal edition. But you can take what you create, take it to the board, and in the full version, you can use those things you've created plus some extra things as well. Just a year or two ago, Promethean Planet has changed. Promethean Planet is the website where all of the Promethean software and add-ons are located. The whole Promethean product has changed. It's merged with a product called ClassFlow, and it appears that the makers of ClassFlow would like to migrate everything over to just that online product, but teachers are not as quick to just migrate over and abandon the ActivInspire. So realize that at this point in time of the creation of this video, you can use ActivInspire with ClassFlow elements within it. So you're getting the best of both products. In this video, we're going to take two different perspectives as we examine the Promethean board software. Number one, because some people will not be as familiar with the software, we will take a look at some of the mechanics of creating and using this software. And number two, let's take a look along the way at some of the design aspects as you learn the mechanics and start creating some flip charts. The very first thing we'll take a look at is, here's a screenshot of the dashboard. So when the software opens up, this dashboard will open. And this gives you access to all the basic things. Like if you're new to ActivInspire, you can learn about it. And we also have the recent files and so on. But notice right up top, we have the engaging lessons aspect. There are, a flip chart is the first thing, the main thing that we'll create. But notice there's access to different activities. And these activities are interesting in that they truly can be interactive with in your class. Because you could either put this and embed this within your presentation, within your flip chart, or you could also say, I think I'm going to create this and it's going to be a standalone product, and I'm going to send this out or share it in some fashion with my students, and then the students get to do some really interesting live activities, interactive things. So flip chart is the main thing here, and then the activities. And also notice on the same dashboard screen, go to the resource library. That's the original, we used to call it the Promethean Planet site. And on that site, you have access to all kinds of resources, so you don't have to start from scratch. And in some cases, they're paid products, and in some cases, they're free products. And they're both resources as well as like add-ins. They are lessons that are already completed. They're also just add-in things. I'm referring to as add-in items like collections of sounds that relate to very specific topics. So there's a whole lot to explore, and much of it is free. Another important thing to note right from the beginning is we mentioned there are two interfaces. There's one to deal primarily with early childhood students, and then the other one is the studio version, or the look and feel, which is useful for maybe middle school students-ish, certainly high school, absolutely. If you go into the View menu, you'll notice on the very bottom of it, primary look and feel. Well, that means that I'm already in the studio look and feel. If I click on that and restart the software, the next time now it opens up in the primary. If I'm in the primary right now, then it'll say studio look and feel. I'm going to have to close the software, restart it, and then I get the studio version, which is ideal for use with older students. So decide, if you're unfamiliar with this software, which group of students, what your audience is going to be, and then select primary or studio. And again, View menu, the very last item is where you select that. Other than the overall look and feel of the two different interfaces, they basically function the same with one major difference, and that is the location of what's known as the browsers. The browsers in Active Software are the different sets of tools that we open up dialog boxes basically to access the ability to interact with and set different parameters for different things that we're going to be creating in the software. So notice in the studio version for the older students, all the browsers are located on the left-hand pane, and we'll see all of the browsers. We have access to them right then and there, and everything appears in that left-hand pane. Now, when we look at the younger children's version, known as the primary version, we have to click on Tools in order to locate many of the browsers. When we click on Tools, on the bottom of the interface, we'll see the resource browser, the object browser, and the page browser. So we'll see some of the browsers in little different locations in the two different interfaces, but they work the same otherwise. Everything is the same, just that the look and the feel is is different for older versus younger children. But notice the major difference here. Click on Tools in order to access some of the browsers in the young children's version. So let's start by taking a basic look at some of the primary mechanics. I'm going to be in the studio look and feel of ActivInspire. So first I find the browsers, and keep in mind that in the younger children's version, the primary version look and feel, some of these browsers will be located over in the toolbox. So here I can see various browsers, and we'll be using them as we go along. Let's look at some of the basics. Over here is the toolbar. Notice that there's a little pin, so I could use the push pin. Now, for me, I don't like seeing these items kind of appear and disappear, so I like to pin them. So you can certainly do that. Over here, you can access this toolbar, and you can do something called a roll-up. When you're teaching, kind of like a shade on a window, you can roll it up and roll it down to buy yourself a little more room. A couple other quick notes. This is the menu, and the reason why the menu is here when it's repeated up here is on top of the screen is because if you're using this live with the board, you probably don't want to have to reach up to the top. That'll be a little stretch for people. So if you can pull this toolbar down lower, and you can open this same menu up, you can access that. Here we have something called the desktop, and the desktop allows us to go right to the desktop, whatever is happening there at the time. So right now it's just taking me into whatever things I have open here. Notice that there's something called the Wonder Wheel. When I go to so desktop is whatever I have on the computer at the time. In order to get back into the software or to access other tools, I can use what they call the Wonder Wheel. Here's the Flipchart, return to, and now I'm back to where I was earlier. And otherwise, we can use these tools to move forward and back within our Flipchart. And then the other tools, most of them are self-explanatory. We've got pins, and we've got text tools, and things of that nature. If I come in here, and again, you think about the pen, well, keep in mind that the pen isn't meant for when you're doing this remotely on your own machine, but rather when you're live at the board, as a teacher historically would have done with an actual Flipchart tablet. Here we have access to different tools. Again, it repeats what's up here in the menu on the top of the screen for your convenience. A couple quick notes. If I'm going to add text, I can type something here. I can highlight that text. Notice that context-sensitive menus appear in toolbars. So here we've got a context-sensitive toolbar, and a lot of these are self-explanatory. You can change the nature of your text just by doing that. Keep in mind that there's an arrow, a pointing tool, and you want to get back into that in order to be able to move this element that you just created. Notice these different handles going around. One of them is marked differently with this diagonal line. That's the proportional resizing. Now, the proportional aspect doesn't matter with text, but it will so much more with graphics. But this one, this special handle, will be the one for proportional resizing when it's appropriate. Here's the moving tool. All these tools up here are known as marquees. Marquees are basically floating tools that travel along with whatever elements you create. And when you experiment with them, you can find what they do. Again, they're pretty self-explanatory. Like here's the way to get back in and edit this text. Then I can click outside of it in order to leave. Another major thing that we need to see is how to erase things and eliminate things. And on the board, this makes it very convenient. I can click and drag this down to the lower right-hand side to the garbage can, or I can also click on an element and then simply click on the garbage can, so I don't have to drag it all the way down there in order to throw that away and dispose of that. The pens, the highlighters, the erasers work exactly how you would think. The paint fill can works exactly how you would think. Here's something that is different is graphics. If I want to insert a graphic here, I'm going to go out, in this case over to Google Images, and I'm going to select something. Instead of copying and pasting and or saving it and then inserting it and embedding it. All I have to do, as long as I'm in the Google Chrome, so it has to be the Google product as a web browser, I'm going to click on this graphic that I see. I'm going to drag it down, and I'm going to drag it down, which now is going to go off your field of vision for a moment. I'm going to drag it down to the taskbar to the Promethean software. As soon as I touch the Promethean software, it opens the software up. Notice I'm still dragging the graphic with me. I release, and there it is. So all I have to do is go out, find something, drag it. I'm dragging it down to the taskbar here in the PC world, and touch the icon that indicates that that's the ActivInspire software. And then it opens it up. It allows me to drag it up here. And now this is when that special handle will allow me proportional resizing as opposed to stretching it around. Another thing that is helpful to know in the mechanics, the basic mechanics, would be linking. So if I wanted to link to a file, or in this case I'm going to go to a website, it's going to say what is your website link. So here they're saying maybe we want to go to Google, for example. So I'm going to type Google in here. Now, better yet, if I were to copy and paste this in, I would have more chance of accuracy, but I'm just going to take the time to just type it quickly. Now, I could create this in several ways, so I'm going to copy this for a moment. I could create this link as just plain text. So let's talk about design for a moment. So here's a link. Now, it's not blue, it's not underlined, but it is a hyperlink. And you can see that by the little action object there. As I roll over this, the pointer turns into a blue forward arrow, meaning I click on this and it's going to open up that site. I'm going to navigate there. And if I set a file, it would have opened up the file. In terms of design, if you want the students to see this URL, then you might want to create the link in that way. Now, I'm going to go into links, and I'm going to say website once again, and I'm going to paste the same URL in, but this time, let me say that it's going to be an image icon. Now, if you don't need the students to see, notice this is the same link. If you don't need the students to see what the text of the URL is, then simply just create this object in order to save some space. Let's do one other way. If I once again do the website, I'm going to paste the same one in. This time I'm going to say an existing object. Well, here's a button with 3 dots to say, well, which object are you talking about? Well, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to locate the graphic, and there it is. So the nice thing here is I can see what can be made hot. And I'm going to choose that graphic. And now, this graphic is now a hot object. So all 3 of these perform the same action. So if the teacher is going to do this, now keep in mind the teacher may need a substitute teacher at some point who may be using this as well. Will you know to roll over this and click on this? So make sure, in terms of design, if you're going to design this, which is also including yourself in usage of this product, down the road, like next year, you might forget, oh yes, that's right, I have to click on this object over here. Maybe I should put a little text underneath here, click the computer, unless it's obvious that that's what we need to do. And when I look at overall mechanics, there are certainly other ones that are out there, but these are some of the primary ones. And I'll point out one other item because I happen to love it. I'm going to use a product name here, Windex. I suppose it's just generic glass cleaner because I love Windex. And Windex can clean many things. And here we can see this object can clean many things off the screen. So those are some basic mechanics to get you started in case you were unfamiliar with using this product. Let me look at one other piece here before we start looking at actually using the product and designing some interactive activities. Let's say I wanted to create a background here. So when we talk about design, and we've talked about UDL guidelines, Universal Design for Learning, and just in general screen design principles, if I want to do this in this product, I have to find the property browser. Now, if I've not clicked on any and highlighted any particular item on this screen, I can now use the property browser to create a background on the entire screen. So I could certainly put an image in here, and you can experiment with those things. You can get your desktop in there, desktop snapshot, and so on. I can also play with colors. I like the design of this because it's simple once you understand it. It's simple and it's easy to use. I can select a color. I can select a second color. So here I've got a gradient. And if I click on this item, now I've got all the different possibilities of what I can do built right in here. So I'm going to go for the lighter on top, darker on bottom. I'll say apply, and there it is. Now, when I do this, keep in mind UDL, I want to make sure I can read all of these. And I think I can at this point. But let's say I wanted to change for readability or for interest's sake one or more of these text boxes. When I click on it, I once again find the property browser, and you'll find all kinds of things that are available here. And ideally, I know it doesn't always happen, but ideally you get the context-sensitive material opening. But it doesn't always happen. In this case, it does, because we look at what's the style of the outline, what's the style of the fill. So I'm going to look at taking a color and putting something in there. And then I can select the color down here. And I can do a second color if I want. And the way it's set up is according to density. And just experimentation will show you the density means how dark is it going to be. So I'm going to make that a little bit lighter. And if I wanted to have an outline around this text box, I could then select all the different parameters. Is it a solid line? Is it a dashed line? What's the width of the line? What are the colors? And all of those types of parameters are there. So those are some mechanics, but also to point out, design-wise, don't forget to make sure that all of this will be very readable over the top of the backgrounds. Most everything else you can experiment with once you get up and running, and you can figure the interface out and how the tools work if you were not already familiar with it. Now let's take a look at some intermediate activities. Let's look at the mechanics, and let's look at some design as we travel along. One of the really interesting things you can do with your students is pull answers out of a hat, so to speak. In other words, out of some object that's on the screen. So here I've got a hat. It's just an object, just a graphic. Here I've created some answers, as it were. So this could be a fun activity. Now, it doesn't have to be answers. They could be questions. They could be student names, and you could pull them, draw them out of the hat, so to speak. All we're doing here is I use the text tool in order to create some different answers, as it were. And here I just kind of simply just said answer 1 and 2 and so on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag these down. Now let's talk about design for a moment, because ultimately these are going to be hotspots in this graphic. So let me pull the graphic out of here. So to make it easier to design, let me space them out a little bit and make a little room so that people can locate them, and I can make them random and move them in different areas. Just leave a little space in there so that there's room to work with them. Okay, so here I now have dragged the hat graphic over the top. Now let me go to the object browser. Now the object browser shows us where everything is located. It can be in a top layer, in a middle layer, it could be in the bottom, or it could be even in the background layer. So at this point, as long as the image is over the top of the answers, we're going to be fine. And what we have to do with this image now is to lock the image, because right now if I touch this, I'm going to be moving the image. So if I right-click this, I can say lock. Once I say lock, now it appears up here in the object browser as locked. That means I cannot touch this graphic anymore. Now don't worry, if you need to touch it, simply go into the object browser. Because I can no longer touch it, it's not going to recognize me as touching it. I'll click on the lock. And with the little menu that's available, I can unlock it again if I choose. And now I once again have access to this. So let me go in, let me lock it. And now, as an activity with my students, notice when we roll over one of these objects, underneath the hat, they're hot, and now it looks like I'm pulling these out. So I have to roll over here until I find something. And that's why in terms of design, we said make sure that you allow enough room in there. Okay, so here I have this, and that's going to work just great. That's a wonderful activity with your students. I'm going to copy these for a moment. Let me just drag a highlight around them. Let me copy both of these, and let me move to the next slide, and I'll do the same thing. As long as I have the image above, that's going to work great. So here I've got my two answers, and notice that they're above the image. So if I click on the image, I find, well, here it is, the object browser, drag it up to the top layer. Instantly, everything else that's behind literally is behind in terms of visual as well. As long as I lock this, I right-click, lock it, and now this becomes the fun activity with your students live, where they can use a pen on the Promethean board to draw those out of there. Now, it doesn't have to be quite that simple. You can make it more effective and more appropriate to the lesson that you're teaching. Let me go out to Google Images for a moment, and let me get some clouds. I'm going to say cloud clip art. So I'm going to go out and drag a cloud in. Once again, with graphics, drag it. Touch the software on the bottom of your screen in the taskbar, and these are going to be vocab words. All right, let me stretch this out a little bit, and the image now is above everything else. That's good. I can lock this image, and now let me go out to Google Images once again, and let me find a beach scene, because if I'm looking at vocabulary in terms of the water cycle, I'll try to find a beach scene without a lot of clouds. I'm going to drag this down, touch the software. Now I'm going to stretch this out. I'll start by doing a proportional resizing, and then I'll just scooch it a little bit this way, as long as I don't distort it too much. Now, here's that image. I'm going to take it lower here, put it in the bottom or in the background layer. That's good. There's my clouds. I've locked this graphic. Now this becomes a fun activity for vocabulary, which many times in the classroom, as you know, is a little more boring activity as perceived by some of the students. Here they can come up and they can drag these out, and then let's look at defining them and describing them and so on. Let's look at one other set of mechanics and how you could use it. Let's look at Magic Ink. So when I look at Magic Ink, notice these are graphics with some objects behind some content, in this case letters for early childhood classroom use. Now, I could simply move them out of the way, but if I use the Magic Ink, so let me go up to Tools. Here's the Magic Ink, and by the way, once you start using these tools, they will start to appear in your toolbar more regularly. So here I've got my Magic Ink. Oh, look at that. I can scratch them off like a lottery ticket. So very interesting activity for your students. So what could you do with this? Well, certainly the students will have fun scratching these. Let me point out one other thing while we're here, in case you're unaware of how this works in the software. These are like little magic windows now. The Magic Ink can actually travel. I could drag this anywhere I want to. Now, in terms of design, if I drag it somewhere like this over the background, we're going to lose it. We're not going to see it any longer. So we have to look at how to deal with that. here we've got magic ink, and then what we can do is, notice this middle marquee is called grouped. If I take an object like this, and this revealer object, as it's known, is something like a pair of glasses, or spyglass, or microscope, or telescope, and something that is related to the content ideally, and something that's going to relate to the be visually understandable and intuitive to the users, that, oh, this is something where we're going to see something. If I drag out some magic ink, and here I have a magic ink, and you can see it up here in the top layer, there's my magic ink. If I drag a highlight over this revealing object and the magic ink, and highlight only the tool, and be careful not to grab other things, and I use this grouped tool, now both of these will move together, and look at that. You can now help students discover things, which includes, if I put a graphic behind, other graphics behind an existing graphic, we can see, in this case, the harmful effects of smoking internally on organs of the body. So it's helpful to be able to see that and allow students to discover that. So what are the unique things here that we have to be aware of? Well, first of all, so this is working right now. Let's see why it's working. The reason why it's working is I have magic ink in here, and I'm going to ungroup this so you can see it. Here's a magic ink that I can drag around, and I'll put it back in place again. The magic ink, you'll notice, is in the top layer. These squares, and this could be any kind of object, these squares are also in the top layer. So I like to think of it like a lottery ticket. And using a lottery ticket, we find that you have a top layer that you take a coin typically and scratch through. So think about top layer. There's the magic ink. There's your coin, so to speak. Here are the little films on top of the ticket. And those three things all these elements have to be in the top layer. Now, the things that we're going to look through and see, so for example here, when you look behind this element, known here as pin 26, simply numbered as we add them, if this is up in the top layer, you won't be able to find it, because you won't, whatever's in the top layer, you're going to peek through. So here's this square, and let me just make sure that I have my magic ink in here, and let me drag my highlight once again and group them together, and I find that I am cutting through any object in the top layer. So that means that this object has to be in the middle layer or beneath, but it cannot be in the top layer. Just for fun, let me drag this up to the top layer. I'm going to put it in the bottom of the top layer. Now, when I go over this, whoops, that's gone as well. So my pen, whatever I wrote, has to be in the middle layer or beneath. Let's do that as a lottery ticket. Here, I've got different films, as it were, the little gray stuff typically, I made it yellow, gray stuff that forms dirt, and you scratch it off with the coin. So notice these are all in the middle layer. Here, I've got this image as a background, so that's good there. Here, I've got a coin, and here I've got a traditional revealing object, and I need a magic ink. So here I've got a magic ink inside of here. So you know how I can do this part. Let me do this a little differently. Let me take this up, this coin now, and maybe I'll resize that just a little bit, make it a little more appropriate. And let me take a magic ink. I'm going to make a new magic ink here. Insert, Tools, Magic Ink, and let me drag, just to make it more realistic, we would normally drag this next to the coin, because that's where where you get to see it after you scratch through it. So there I've got the pen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my highlight, to my pointer tool. I'm going to carefully drag around here so I don't grab anything else in this highlight. I'm going to press the middle marquee, which is to group. And now when I drag this down, as long as the pen is on top, as long as this image is on top, and then I look down here, oh, wait a minute. This is in the middle. So any of these things in the middle, I kind of led you astray there earlier on purpose to say, well, I think he's doing something wrong here. So if you did, you were right on target. I'm going to grab all of these and put them at the bottom. Whoops. I'll have to scooch it a little better here. Put this at the bottom of the top layer. Now let me take that coin. Ooh, look at that. One other oddity. Look at how the coin is disappearing. The coin is disappearing because it's an image and it's in the lower, it's in the middle layer, so it's lower in the list here. So really the pen and the revealing object should be right on the top of the top layer. Okay, now it's going to work just fine. Now, let's show you one other view of this. Let's look at design. How would you use this? Let's say I wanted to have an activity with my students, and I wanted to make it such that we could say, well, here are some healthy foods and some unhealthy foods. So let's choose some graphics that are appropriate to the content. So here I have a refrigerator. I already inserted a thumbs up, thumbs down, and I could certainly do more than this. So I'm going to take this graphic for the healthy and include that in the refrigerator. And I'm going to take this one and put it over here. Now, I can do one of two things with this because, well, first of all, let me take this up because I know this has to go up in the top layer. So let me put that there already. Let me take this one, top layer, so I can peek through it. And the two things I can do, I can either use magic ink to scrape through this, or I could go and connect this to some revealing object. Now think about, in terms of design, what would be an appropriate revealing object? Well, what do you find in a refrigerator, or what do you find in a kitchen? Could you use a graphic that's maybe a pot or a pan, and you've got that circular area in the middle, and you could cut that out with a magic ink? Could you use a thermometer here? Could you use, because a lot of times you find them in a refrigerator. Is there some other cooking utensil? Could you use a spoon or a fork? And then either have, like the spoon, the bowl of the spoon could be the area where you could drag the magic ink. Or if you had a knife or a fork, you could simply, like we did with the coin earlier, we could draw the magic ink right around it, right near it, so it's touching it. In this case, I'm not going to take the time to go out and find the graphics. I'm just going to go out and get a magic ink, and I'm going to say, let's do it live with our students, and we'll simply scratch through which is the healthy one, there it is, and which is the unhealthy, and there it is, and our students can enjoy looking at these different aspects of the content and exploring it and trying it live with you in class. Now let's take a look at a more advanced technique to provide interactivity for your students. And let's look at the mechanics and again also some design aspects as well. So what I'd like to do is create an answer area. Now in this case I made a very simple, just a shape, just a box. I've got three answers. Right now they're very generic. Answer 1, 2, and 3. So let's demo it first. If the student selects answer 2, places it in the box, it bounces it out. It rejects it. Answer 3 bounces out. If answer 1 goes in, it's the correct answer in this case, it will go in, be accepted, and then a cool sound, a reward sound, will play. So how does this work? Well, let's take a look at it. And I'll move out of the simple text box or object box. Let's look at a graphic in this case. This will be the answer area. So the answer area, the answer, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to move to the property browser. When I go to the property browser, I want to make sure I open the container feature. I'm going to close these other pieces just so it's not confusing. When I go into the container area, it says it can contain nothing, anything, which in this case, if I have specific responses available, that's not going to help anything. So I'm not going to say anything, but I could say a specific object, or I could say keywords, which means multiple objects. So in this case, let's do one specific object. When I say specific object, now this becomes enabled, this next piece. It says contain what object. I'll click on the three little dots, and it shows me every object here. So which animal can live in a pond? I'm going to click on the very first, in this case, you see the frog, and I'll say OK. So now the answer area has that information as to how to make that decision. Now, contains words, that's for multiple, so that's disabled. Completely contained, that's a good idea. Keep that, because that means when this object is dragged in, it has to be all the way in and not like partially dragged in. It's got to be all the way in. Do you want a reward sound? If so, say true. If not, just leave it blank and leave it false. And then if you want a reward sound, then you have to go and specify one. And you notice that ActivInspire comes with a number of sounds available. So I'm going to go to, maybe I'm going to choose nature. And no, maybe not nature. That's rain sounds and so on. Let me do some type of an effect. So I'm going to choose a chime to have a positive sound, a happy sound. Okay, and then the only thing that we don't answer here, we don't respond to this final one, which is return if not contain. In other words, if it's the wrong answer. That is reserved for the responses. So right now, when I click on this answer area, all of this information, except for this last one, is completed. So this answer area knows how to decide and which one single answer to allow in here. Now, I'm going to go to each of the individual responses, and all I have to do is, this top part, this has already been responded to in the answer area, so skip that. Return if not contained, turn that to true. That simply means if I go to drag the frog in, if the frog is the wrong answer, it should bounce out. It should be rejected. Now here's a little trick. Instead of doing this 3 times, I'm going to drag, highlight around, and notice I'm being kind of a little more close with what I'm doing here. I'm not being very generous with the highlight because I could easily, by accident, have dragged this other piece into there. I only want these 3 answers, or possible responses. Return if not contained, turn them all to true at one time. Okay, I'll click outside of this, and now we're ready to go. If the user drags in an incorrect answer, it goes out. If they drag in the correct answer, there's our positive sound, and it stays in. And by the way, when you're using this with the board, if you save it, it will save the position of these items. So we'll have to drag that back out if I'm going to save it again, especially if I'm just testing it now. I'll definitely want to test it, but I'll also want to drag it back out. Now, what happens if we have more than one correct response? So what we have to do here is, same type of thing. We have to go into this answer area, which in this case is just going to be a box, which is appropriate in this case. We're going to drag these different objects into the box. Let's find the vowels. Okay, but there are also consonants here. So I'm going to start off, notice it's trying to look at the fill and the outline because it's a box. I'm going to close those just for clarity now. What can this box contain? Well, specific object is 1. Keywords means multiple. Okay, so object, the single, that's disabled, contains words. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to come up with words. Now, there are two schools of thought when you're designing this. First of all, the users, the students, will never see this. It's behind the scenes. But in terms of designing this so that it will work in a robust fashion for you as a teacher going forward, you could say this box can contain the letter A, the letter E, the letter U, and sometimes Y. So we could put all of those letters down here if we wanted. So if I wanted to go in that route, I would say add a word, and I would say A, and then I would simply add that in by hitting enter. Now, I'm going to remove that for a moment because another way I could do this is I could say add a word and make it vowel. I'll hit enter. Now the word vowel, any of these answers that, possible responses that have the word vowel associated with them, that's their identification. All the vowels will come in. So again, design thoughts. We have to take a look at what is the best way to design this for your use so it's robust, because as a teacher, you may want to use this same setup, but then change maybe the parameters of what designates the correct response. So in this case, I'm going to keep the word vowel. Now, if I wanted to, I could go down and say I'll keep completely contained reward sound and location if I wanted to. For now, I'm going to skip that. Especially with multiple answers, a quick design point, it will kind of lose its excitement and motivational factor for the students if, while they drag 4 correct answers in here, they keep hearing the reward sound. The reward sound should maybe be for a little more special event. One important correct answer or something of that nature, not just answer, 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 right. So I'm not going to use a reward sound here. Okay, let's get back to mechanics. When I go up to here, I find the letter A is a vowel. Now I'm going to skip all this outline and all of this. Let's go up to the identification. When I move up to identification, it has named what this text box is, but the answer area will not look at that. The answer area is going to look for keywords. Now you recall a moment ago, I typed the word vowel. So what keyword do I want to match here? In this case, the word vowel. Now be careful that you say the word vowel or vowels, or if I put letter A and E, whatever it is, type it exactly as it appears in the answer box. Because if they don't match exactly, it's not going to accept it. It's going to reject it. So this is a vowel. So I'm going to go and quickly do, I'll just do 2 of the vowels for now. But I would do that to all of the vowels in here. So I just go in and say identification. This is a vowel. Got it. Now, for these letters, because I use the word vowel as the nomenclature, I'm going to go in and say consonant. Oh, careful now, because that's a big word. Maybe I'm going to say cons, because I don't want to take a chance that I'm going to misspell it. One misspelling will bomb this whole activity for the students. It will be giving them false information. Now, in this case, because it's a vowel piece, I could go in and I can certainly say the keyword here, this is a vowel. But we know that this could also be a consonant. So I'm also going to set this up with my keyword for consonant because, again, I want to design this in a robust fashion. Maybe down the road I'm going to use this same setup. I'll copy and paste this and duplicate it. But at that point, I want to use something else. Maybe this will now be the consonant box, or it could be letters that can function both as vowels and consonant box. Now for that one, design-wise, I would probably use a reward sound because that's kind of like a, on Jeopardy, that would be the more expensive answer here. It would be the something that is worthy of something more. And just to show that it'll work, the A will go in, and I didn't complete all of these. And this is interesting because I think I completed the B, if I'm not mistaken. Notice how there's a little error happening here. Oh, I could tell you why the error happened. Because I forgot to go in and say all of these responses return if not contained, true. But sometimes, and I want to point this out, sometimes when you do this, now notice that it did reject that. And it's not going to find that word here, so it is rejecting it. But sometimes when you're designing your screen, maybe you'll drag the wrong answer in. Instead of rejecting it, it seems to have run amok here, and it will accept it. In my experience with the software, that's a little glitch, and sometimes it will happen when you're in the design mode. When you save it and you clear out the cache and you reopen it, for example, in class live to use it, I've never seen that experience that happen again. So if you have an answer that should be rejected and it's not rejected, just drag it back out, save it, close it. When you reopen, it's going to work just fine. Now, to round out, let's take a look at doing this in a little different fashion now. Instead of a box, I can use a graphic. So this graphic now becomes the answer area. So I'm going to take the answer area, and just as a quick review, one object or multiple objects. So I'm going to say multiple, then what are the words? So I'm going to show this example because when we talk about designing this, and again, this is not something that the user will see, but the teacher will see this behind the scenes. When we say, what are the key words? I could design this in one of two ways, as with the vowels and consonants. I could come up with a word that refers to the fish or pond dwellers. So I could have a word like pond as a keyword, and I'll have all three of these creatures get that word. And maybe this creature over here, the cow, will now be a land keyword. But that's not going to be very robust. What I might want to do is, I might want to go in and say what keywords, and I'll do the second version of this. I can go in and say a frog would be appropriate. A turtle would be appropriate. I'm being careful how I spell them. And a fish would be appropriate. A cow would not be appropriate. So now the answer area is complete, unless I wanted to say a reward sound, but I won't take the time to do that right now. I'm going to highlight all of these possible responses, and all of them get this very last piece. Say true. In other words, they'll all bounce out if they're not appropriate. Now for each of these, I have to go up and give them a keyword identification. So keywords, in this case, instead of saying pond, I'm going to say this is the turtle. And I'll go over here and say this is the frog. So this way, if I swap out this answer area down the road and put a barn here, graphic, then I can say the barn doesn't hold land animals, but rather the barn holds keyword cow. And all I would have to do is, I would not have to change any parameters on these possible answers, these animals, but rather I would have to just change the parameters up here. What keyword or words will this accept? Now, one final possibility, we could have two possible answer areas. So I'm going to take the time to develop this because I'm just going to do the same procedure that I did. But realize I would just have to respond the container for here, the container for here, and say what it's going to accept. And in this case, I could say one of two things. Rocky, and up here I'd have to say identify this up here, which is keywords identification, that this is a rocky planet, rocky, gas, gas. Or I could do the opposite. I could say this answer area will accept the keyword, because this is multiple objects now that it can take. And I'm going to say the keyword is, it'll take Venus and the keyword Mars, and the same thing over here. And don't forget to highlight all of the possible answers and say true to return if they're incorrect, and finally go into each one of these and place the appropriate keyword. In summary, in this video, we considered how to use the ActivInspire and ClassFlow products that are available for the Promethean board so that we could create flip charts that would be interactive and informative for our students. In this video, we took a look at the mechanics in case you were unfamiliar with use of this software, and we also considered design issues along the way. For our first activity to wrap up this week's class, let's hold a debriefing on all the content that we considered. As usual, I have provided some starter questions to spark our discussion. As we've been doing, remember that you do not have to answer or respond to all of these questions, but these are meant to start our discussion. Between all of us, by the time we finish this discussion board, we will probably have touched on most or all of these starter questions. For our second activity this week, we're going to do a brief article review. Let's take a look at a meta-analysis of podcasts in the field of education. And this article covers K through 12 as well as higher education. In a world of video and a lot of visual media, can we use podcasts? Can we use audio only? Because of that, we'll take a look at we'll tackle that particular issue as we consider this article. As you read through the article, consider some of these points, and these points may help to guide your review of the article and your reading of it. What are the benefits to students when an instructor uses audio only or a podcast? Is evidence strong enough to suggest that teachers should use audio? In other words, are students actually learning from audio podcasts? After you consider that, what are some different ways that teachers can use audio? And what do studies suggest that students do with them? Like, how do they use them? Where do they use them? Do they benefit by this format of media? And a final thought would be, how might you utilize podcasts in your teaching or training? For our third and final activity for this week's class, your choice, let's do a guided project, either design and create a podcast or design and create a Promethean Board flipchart using ActivInspire. Maybe consider which medium speaks to you, or maybe which one you're unfamiliar with or you've never really utilized, or you haven't utilized to the fullest. Your choice. Select one of these projects to try your hand at creating and designing. If you choose the audio podcast route, then begin by selecting some focused content, something that's going to be definable and able to be presented in a very short period of time, and then select an audio recording app of your choice. Briefly introduce yourself, the content, and remember the importance of specifying the outline or the objectives right in the beginning of the presentation, because there's no visual to support the student's understanding of the organization of the content. So be very definitive with that and very explicit with that. Remember to provide some descriptive transitions in order to also support the understanding of the organization of content as you move throughout your presentation. Briefly create a summary of the content to finish. Now, if you're advanced, consider creating an intro and an outro with music. Remember to keep the presentation short and also save the file ultimately as an MP3 formatted file. Alternatively, if you select the flipchart version of the guided project, Then start by selecting some content that you can support through a flipchart, as you would with PowerPoint. And remember to apply all of the design guidelines that we described for use with PowerPoint, as they definitely apply in ActivInspire in this format, in this platform. But then remember to capitalize on and build in at least one or more of the interactive design capabilities that are available in ActivInspire. For example, create an activity in which students pull items out of a hat, or they use magic ink to scratch off a top layer and reveal some content, or go a little, one step further, a little more advanced, and create a revealing object and group it with the magic ink so the students can grab onto that object like a magnifying glass or a pair of eyeglasses, and then have them reveal the content as they roll over that with the magic ink grouped with that revealing object. Or another advanced capability is to allow students to drag possible responses into some answer area, and then they will find that either that answer will be accepted because it's correct. Maybe you want to use a reward sound there if there's only one correct response, or if it's an incorrect response, then that response will be bounced out of there. It will be rejected by the answer area. So remember to capitalize on some of the interactive capabilities, which are the strengths of the ActivInspire platform. Looking ahead, next week is our last week of class, and we're going to spend our time reviewing and summarizing and highlighting all of the design elements that we studied within this course, and we'll conclude with several wrap-up activities. Have a good week, and we'll see you in class next time.